No one expected it to change course, not like this. For months, scientists described 3I Atlas as a harmless visitor, an interstellar rock simply passing through our solar system, a ghost from another star on a path that would carry it back into the dark. But tonight, something changed. Subtle at first, a shift in velocity, a fractional curve in trajectory, and then unmistakable. 3I Atlas is no longer leaving, it's turning. And according to the latest deep space data, that turn points toward us. It started with a flicker in NASA's Solar Observatory feed, the kind of glitch they usually ignore. But the timestamps didn't match. Across 3 separate instruments, SOHO, Stereo, and a ground-based array in Chile, the same anomaly appeared at the same moment. A thin, curling plume extending from 3I Atlas, followed by a sudden acceleration that defied every model. That plume wasn't gas or dust. It was too organised, a perfect spiral that widened, then folded back into itself. The math doesn't work. Nothing in known physics should behave that way near a gravitational body. And yet, there it was, a signature of motion that no natural object should make. If you're new here, welcome, and if you enjoy this journey through the strangest mystery in the sky right now, hit that like button and subscribe, because the story of 3I Atlas isn't just about astronomy anymore, it's about us and what might be waiting out there. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time you started this video, because tonight you'll want to remember exactly when you heard this. In the past 48 hours, every major observatory, from the European Space Agency's solar orbiter to Japan's Hinode mission, has turned its instruments toward the Sun's inner orbit, tracking 3I Atlas as it passed through its closest approach. What they found didn't make sense. Instead of fading as it moved behind the Sun, the object brightened, fourfold. It wasn't reflecting light, it was emitting it. Scientists describe this kind of emission as coherent, meaning the light wasn't scattered like that of a comet tail, but aligned, structured, as if modulated by design. Then, something else happened. For the first time since it entered our solar system, 3I Atlas transmitted radio interference strong enough to distort signals across multiple deep space networks. At first, they thought it was solar noise, but when astronomers at the Canberra Deep Space Complex filtered the frequencies, a repeating harmonic appeared, one that corresponded exactly to the object's spin rate. It was broadcasting itself. The discovery spread quietly across encrypted scientific channels. A single phrase repeated in early internal memos, intentional modulation unlikely, but cannot be ruled out. Those 7 words marked the moment 3I Atlas stopped being just another celestial body and became something far more difficult to categorize. The pattern wasn't random. It pulsed in ratios, mathematical constants that appear throughout organic and synthetic systems alike. A Fibonacci sequence, a golden ratio echo. NASA's official statement called it residual electromagnetic interference from solar wind interactions. But multiple insiders, speaking off record, have confirmed the tracking data doesn't align with that explanation. The object's new trajectory cuts directly across the plane of Earth's orbit, an adjustment that, statistically, borders on impossible, and yet the numbers are clear. 3I Atlas isn't being pulled toward us by gravity alone, it's choosing the path. The idea terrifies the agencies that are watching, because it means 3I Atlas is no longer passive, it's moving with purpose. This morning, data from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed what independent astronomers had already begun whispering online. 3I Atlas is on a revised course that will bring it within 0.3 astronomical units of Earth, closer than Venus. In cosmic terms, that's a hair's breadth. And if it maintains this acceleration, the encounter window opens in less than 6 weeks. But the strangest part isn't the trajectory, it's the behaviour. Over the past few nights, amateur astronomers have reported synchronized light fluctuations, bursts of infrared energy repeating every 9 hours. When mapped in sequence, those pulses form a perfect grid, expanding outward like ripples through the solar wind. One researcher compared it to sonar, as if the object were scanning the space around it. Searching. NASA hasn't released any public footage of these bursts, but leaked frames from an internal JPL analysis show something extraordinary. Faint secondary objects, smaller fragments, orbiting 3I Atlas like satellites. A swarm moving in perfect synchronization, each reflecting a different wavelength of light. Their alignment isn't random, it's geometric. It's not a collision path anymore, it's a rendezvous. The official line remains cautious, no cause for alarm, but the classified memos tell a different story. Internally, agencies are preparing for multiple outcomes, including gravitational interference with near-Earth satellites and electromagnetic disruption of high-orbit systems. Yet the language between the lines hints at something more psychological. One note, allegedly from NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, refers to a Phase 3 media containment protocol. Translation, they're not just preparing for the object, they're preparing for our reaction to it. Meanwhile, the most advanced telescopes on Earth, the James Webb, the Vera Rubin Observatory, the Square Kilometre Array, are being tasked to monitor the object's optical and radio emissions continuously. A team at Harvard's Galileo project, led by Avi Loeb, has reportedly detected anomalous polarization signatures consistent with reflective control surfaces. In simpler terms, mirrors, or something functioning like them, adjusting orientation in response to sunlight. That's not behavior we associate with comets, that's behavior we associate with navigation. And here's where the story fractures. Some scientists believe it's an unprecedented natural phenomenon, a comet made of materials we've never encountered, perhaps metallic hydrogen or some exotic crystalline structure reacting to solar flux. Others believe it's artificial, not necessarily alien in the sensational sense, but evidence of a technology, maybe ancient, maybe automated, that predates our understanding of the solar system itself. Whatever it is, it's not done moving. The last update from the Deep Space Network shows a new acceleration vector, slight but deliberate, nudging the object's course closer still. Its current projection crosses the ecliptic plane just ahead of Earth's position in orbit, meaning that in a matter of weeks, our planet will pass directly through the path 3I Atlas just cleared. Dust, radiation, or something else entirely could be waiting there. And so the question has shifted. No longer what 3I Atlas is, but why now? Why this moment in our technological evolution? Why appear just as we finally begin to see beyond our own cosmic neighbourhood? Some say it's coincidence. Others, like Loeb, suspect timing itself may be part of the message. Because if 3I Atlas is on its way to Earth, maybe it isn't coming at us. Maybe it's coming for us. The story broke quietly, almost by accident. A small astronomy YouTube channel in Poland posted a 15-second clip of sky-tracking footage that showed what looked like a stationary point of light near the Sun, but when overlaid with official NASA ephemerides, it matched 3I Atlas's coordinates exactly. The object wasn't moving the way it should. It was holding position. Within hours, the video spread across social media before vanishing from every major platform. Not flagged or copyrighted, just gone. Re-uploads failed. Comments froze mid-thread. And yet, somehow, the clip still exists in fragments, mirrored across anonymous forums and private cloud archives, like the universe itself doesn't want it to disappear completely. When people first saw it, most assumed it was fake. Another AI composite, another digital hoax meant to farm views. But astrophysicists who analysed the video frame by frame confirmed something unsettling. The data lines matched real solar observatory timestamps. This wasn't CGI, it was sensor-level footage. Whatever 3I Atlas had done, it had paused, suspended against the backdrop of solar plasma, ignoring every physical force that should have torn it apart. And in that moment of defiance, it left behind something else. A ripple. Across multiple instruments, a standing wave appeared in the solar magnetic field, expanding outward like a pressure ring. Instruments in orbit around Earth picked it up seconds later, a coordinated magnetic pulse timed to the object's shift. No explosion, no flare, no obvious release of matter. Just a field-wide tremor, moving faster than it should, as if space-time itself had hiccuped. That's when the narrative began to change. NASA held its first official press conference on 3I Atlas in weeks, but it wasn't led by scientists, it was handled by public affairs officers. The language was calm, clinical and precise. Minor trajectory fluctuation, consistent with cometary jet outgassing. No threat to Earth at this time. But as journalists pressed for numbers, none were provided. No velocity, no angle, no time frame. Only one short phrase repeated like a script. The situation remained stable. Except it wasn't. Hours later, the European Space Agency's data portal went offline for scheduled maintenance. The Japanese JAXA observatory feed followed soon after. Within a day, the only remaining live data source was a network of independent observatories, amateurs scattered across Arizona, Chile and Namibia, whose telescopes were still pointed at the object. Their observations painted a different picture. 3i Atlas was brightening again, this time in rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. Each pulse was synchronized with minute fluctuations in Earth's magnetosphere. It wasn't random, it was responding. And as scientists tried to model the event, one strange pattern emerged. The pulse intervals matched the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency that oscillates between Earth's surface and the ionosphere. It was as if 3i Atlas had locked onto the planet's heartbeat. Around that time, a NASA insider, anonymous, posting through encrypted channels, began sharing what they described as discarded telemetry, data packages showing signal strength readings far higher than anything officially released. One line stood out among the pages of code: phase correlation achieved, harmonic resonance stable. It read less like astronomy, more like engineering, as if someone, or something, was synchronizing with us. Then came the storm, not in space, but on Earth. 2 nights later, the northern hemisphere was hit by one of the most intense auroral displays in recorded history. Skywatchers as far south as Madrid and California saw the heavens ignite in blood-red arcs, spirals of green and violet bending in unnatural geometries. Unlike normal auroras, these weren't random curtains of light. They formed structures, repeating loops, twisting rings, helixes, like symbols written across the atmosphere itself. Some compared them to ancient runes, others to mathematical diagrams, but the pattern that repeated most often matched a waveform, the same harmonic frequency detected from 3i Atlas just days earlier. For hours the world stood beneath those skies watching the heavens pulse in rhythm with an object no one could explain. Governments issued no statement. Space agencies went silent. Even the usually chatty astronomers on social media withdrew, their accounts going dormant overnight. Only one post survived, a single line from a researcher in Finland. "This isn't space weather, it's a transmission medium." Then, at precisely 03:17 UTC, every magnetometer on Earth recorded a global spike, not destructive but synchronized. For 7.2 seconds, every compass needle on the planet drifted east, then west, before returning to normal. Power grids flickered but didn't fail. Satellites reset their orientation sensors, and in deep space, 3i Atlas dimmed completely. It didn't fade gradually, it vanished. For almost 48 minutes, it was gone, invisible to every spectrum, every radar, every telescope. Then just as suddenly it reappeared, but not where it should have been. Somehow it had shifted by nearly 0.02 astronomical units, an impossible distance to cover in less than an hour. Scientists struggle to describe it. The math doesn't fit acceleration, it doesn't fit propulsion. The only possible term they could agree on was phase displacement, as if the object had simply stepped sideways through space. After that, something strange began happening to radio telescopes on Earth. Their data channels began picking up interference not from space, but from within their own systems, feedback loops that seemed to originate inside the instruments themselves. The signals contained recurring structures, nested waveforms, harmonic sequences, prime number intervals. When researchers plotted the data on frequency graphs, they didn't get static, they got geometry. One researcher at the Square Kilometre Array described it as a 3-dimensional map of resonance space. But the most haunting part was what appeared at its centre, a shape that mirrored Earth's orbital path, overlaid with an arc, the precise curve of 3i Atlas's new trajectory. It was as if the signal were trying to show us something, a meeting point. By now, fear had spread far beyond the scientific community. Stock markets dipped, airlines quietly rerouted polar flights, and rumours began circulating that NASA had activated contingency protocols normally reserved for impact scenarios. But insiders insisted this wasn't about collision, it was about control. If the object could manipulate its position in space, could it also manipulate fields, electromagnetic, gravitational, even neural? Because something else began changing. people's dreams. Across multiple continents, social media filled with reports of identical visions, strangers describing the same image, a spiral of light hovering over a black ocean, a low hum that seemed to speak without words, a presence that felt both alien and intimately familiar. Psychologists dismissed it as mass suggestion, the human mind projecting fear into shared symbolism. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The dream started within hours of 3I Atlas's phase displacement, and in laboratories where sensitive magnetometers tracked tiny fluctuations in ambient fields, faint pulses aligned perfectly with the global timestamps of those dreams. The line between physics and consciousness began to blur. At this point, even the skeptics went quiet. Because one truth became impossible to deny: 3I Atlas wasn't simply on its way to Earth, it was interacting, using fields we barely understand to touch the planet before it ever arrived. Whether it meant harm, communication, or something beyond either, no one could say. But the whispers in the deep space community began to circle one phrase: quiet, unsettling, and somehow older than the language itself. It's preparing the resonance. The silence from official channels lasted almost 20 hours. Then, without warning, NASA's public feed went live. The director of the Planetary Science Division appeared, calm, expressionless, reading from a prepared statement. He spoke of routine recalibration, of expected optical anomalies during solar transit, and of temporary telemetry inconsistencies. But behind his words something felt rehearsed, too perfect, too smooth. Every pause timed, every syllable weighted. It wasn't a statement meant to inform, it was a statement meant to pacify. Minutes later, independent data analysts discovered something else. During the broadcast, every active feed from the Deep Space Network had quietly switched to encrypted mode. That's not normal. The DSN only goes dark under one condition: emergency synchronization protocols, meaning all major observatories, NASA, ESA, JAXA, ISRO, had been linked under a single command authority. The public saw calm faces and scripted words. But behind the curtain, the agencies had just gone to their highest internal alert level. Whistleblowers describe it now as the blackout. During those hours, a handful of astronomers, those outside the official network, kept watching. Their observations showed that 3I Atlas hadn't disappeared. It had fragmented. At least 4 smaller objects now accompanied it, moving in precise formation, their relative distances fixed. A tetrahedral pattern spinning in slow rotation. Not debris, not chance alignment. It looked deliberate. And at the geometric centre of that formation, 3I Atlas itself pulsed once. A blinding flare in the ultraviolet spectrum, invisible to human eyes, but captured by instruments across the world. That pulse triggered something unprecedented. Earth's ionosphere flickered. Communication satellites momentarily dropped out of sync. Ground-based radar systems in multiple countries registered false returns. Reflections with impossible velocity shifts, as if something had just passed through their beams faster than light. The incident lasted seconds, maybe less, but the data remains, residual distortions etched into the upper atmosphere like a scar. Then came the leak. A single document, circulated among astronomers through encrypted email titled Project Sync Preliminary Analysis. No official header, no agency seal, but the formatting matched NASA's internal briefing style. The document outlined a scenario called resonant infiltration, the idea that certain high-energy cosmic objects could induce synchronized oscillations in planetary magnetic fields, effectively embedding information within them. In simpler terms, a data signal carried not through radio but through the Earth itself. The memo's final line was stark. Global coherence event predicted. Possible intentional origin, maintain containment. Within hours, the document vanished. But its contents were already archived, mirrored, and analysed by researchers around the world. One of them was Dr. Avi Loeb. Loeb, who had long been dismissed by some as an idealist, published a brief but explosive commentary on his personal blog. In it, he described a new detection, faint but structured microwave echoes matching the exact frequency of 3I Atlas's recent emissions. These are not reflections, he wrote. They are phase-locked signals originating within the heliosphere. Something is transmitting back. He didn't say what it meant, only that the data implies intelligence, either ours or someone else's. Within hours, the post was removed, replaced with a generic 404, but cached versions confirmed every word. It was enough. The story was out. Across social media, 3i Atlas became the most searched term on Earth. Mainstream news outlets covered it cautiously, framing it as an astrophysical curiosity, while science communicators pleaded for patience and data. Yet even as they spoke, global tracking networks began reporting something chilling. The object's velocity profile was changing again, but this time not relative to the Sun, relative to us. In orbital mechanics, that's not supposed to happen. A comet doesn't adjust its motion to track a planet, and yet 3i Atlas was subtly aligning with Earth's path, compensating for our movement around the Sun. The numbers made no sense. Whatever this object was, it wasn't drifting anymore. It was steering. In Houston, NASA convened an unscheduled closed-door meeting at the Johnson Space Center. Attendees included top-level scientists, defense analysts, and representatives from multiple intelligence agencies. No transcripts were released, but insiders described the atmosphere as tense, almost surreal. The key agenda: determining whether 3i Atlas represented a navigational intelligence, and if so, what its purpose might be. One participant later summarized it in a single chilling phrase: "We're not tracking an object, we're being tracked by one." That night, a faint, structured signal appeared again, this time captured simultaneously by observatories in Australia and South Africa. The signal repeated at regular intervals, precisely timed to Earth's rotation. The waveform, when translated into audible sound, produced a deep, harmonic tone, hauntingly similar to the background resonance recorded in human neural patterns during deep sleep. When visualized, the structure resembled concentric circles intersected by radial lines, like a radar sweep drawn across the cosmos. Researchers at MIT's Haystack Observatory attempted to decode the waveform by running it through linguistic pattern recognition software. The output wasn't a message, but a map. Coordinates plotted across the inner solar system, converging on one location. Earth's orbital intersection 0.6 weeks from now. The same date already predicted by independent orbital models. It wasn't coincidence, it was confirmation. Meanwhile, a classified transmission leaked from within NASA's communications hub, a brief 6-second clip of distorted audio, barely audible through static. At first, it sounded like electromagnetic interference, but after digital enhancement, a low rhythmic pulse became clear, a slow, deliberate pattern that repeated 3 times before fading. A sequence so simple, yet so universal, it bypassed every language barrier. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 again, then silence. It wasn't random, it was structure, deliberate, minimal, precise. And though no agency would confirm it publicly, every insider knew what that sequence meant. In basic binary communication, 3 on, 3 off is a handshake, the simplest possible way to say, ready to receive. After that night, something shifted in the way the world looked at the sky. People began noticing how quiet everything felt. Flights passed without contrails. Satellites moved slower than they should. Even the auroras, still faintly glowing from the earlier storms, seemed to pulse more gently, almost listening. And yet, through all the fear, a strange calm settled in. Because maybe, just maybe, 3i Atlas wasn't preparing to attack or collide. Maybe it was waiting, observing, aligning itself with something older, deeper, and far more intricate than physics alone could describe. Dr. Loeb posted one final message before going silent entirely. It wasn't through official channels, not even on his site. It appeared on a small forum for theoretical astrophysics, a single paragraph signed only with his initials. When an unknown system aligns with our orbit, it's not always approaching us. Sometimes it's synchronizing, becoming part of a network too large for us to perceive. The question isn't what 3i Atlas wants. The question is what we're about to become. After that, his account was deleted. In the days that followed, every observatory on Earth pointed toward 3i Atlas again. The swarm formation was still there, expanding, rotating, rearranging into new geometric configurations. It wasn't random drift. It was constructing something. A lattice, a field, maybe a communication array, maybe something even larger. The shape was incomplete, but the intent was clear. This was an architecture, a structure being woven not of matter, but of resonance itself. And as the patterns grew clearer, one realization spread through the scientific community like a cold wind through an empty observatory dome. If it was building something, then it wasn't alone. The first sign that 3i Atlas was no longer just a distant event came quietly, almost politely. Weather satellites began registering atmospheric fluctuations, small rhythmic density shifts over the Pacific, barely perceptible, but perfectly synchronized with the swarm's rotational frequency. They didn't resemble any known weather pattern or jet stream disturbance. It was as if the entire upper atmosphere had begun to breathe in time with something far beyond it. At first, scientists blamed calibration errors, instruments glitch, data drifts. But the anomalies didn't stop. Within days, meteorological sensors in multiple hemispheres, Europe, Asia, South America, all reported the same strange pattern, a faint, low-frequency oscillation passing through the atmosphere roughly every 6 hours. Each pass coincided with a change in 3i Atlas's internal geometry, as though the swarm's formation were turning like gears, locking into a larger mechanism we couldn't yet see. Governments, of course, said nothing. But something in their silence changed. Suddenly, global space agencies stopped releasing orbital data altogether. The NORAD public tracking feeds, once freely available, went offline for maintenance. Even private tracking systems like SpaceTrack began showing blank gaps where 3i Atlas should have been. In its place, only static, as if someone had deleted the sky. Then, an unmarked press leak reached journalists from a European news outlet, a single sentence allegedly from inside the European Space Agency's control room. It's not approaching anymore, it's synchronizing. The phrase spread faster than any official statement could have. Synchronizing? What did that mean? Synchronizing with what? That night, hundreds of amateur astronomers tried to reacquire the object. Most saw nothing, but a handful, those using wide-field infrared lenses, caught something astonishing. Not a single bright body anymore, but multiple faint streaks forming a web-like structure, spanning tens of thousands of kilometers. Each line pulsed faintly, like strands of light tightening around an invisible core. The next morning, strange reports began to surface from across the globe. Compass needles swaying without magnetic interference, birds migrating in erratic patterns, radio stations picking up harmonic feedback on unused frequencies, and in certain regions, remote deserts, open seas, and mountain plateaus, travellers reported a low, mechanical hum that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The sound wasn't constant. It rose and fell like a tide. Those who heard it described it the same way. It felt alive. NASA finally broke the silence, but not to reassure the public. They released a 2-sentence notice. Following the latest solar encounter, 3i Atlas has entered a post-perihelion drift phase. All current data remains within expected physical parameters. Except it hadn't. The object wasn't drifting. It was stabilizing. Its acceleration had stopped completely, not slowing, not decaying, but maintaining a perfect constant relative to Earth's orbital position. A state of motion so exact it suggested active control. That same week, an image leaked from an internal ESA server. It showed the swarm in high resolution, captured by the solar orbiter. The formation wasn't random, it had evolved. The objects now formed a lattice that resembled an antenna, a vast luminous frame with symmetrical arms radiating outward from a central core. Engineers who saw it described one haunting detail. The structure's design wasn't optimized for transmission outward. It was shaped to receive. Across universities and labs, theories erupted. Some called it a cosmic relay. Others, more quietly, suggested it was something else. A probe waiting for activation, a gateway aligning with something that wasn't here yet. Then, at precisely 4402 UTC on a cold November night, the world trembled. Every magnetometer from Alaska to Antarctica spiked simultaneously. Instruments registered a global magnetic pulse. Silent, invisible, but strong enough to make compasses swing and electronic clocks reset. For 7 minutes, every satellite orbiting Earth recorded bursts of static. The global positioning network failed, then rebooted. In the chaos of data, astronomers captured one thing, a flash from 3I Atlas, bright enough to momentarily outshine Venus. But unlike a normal flare, it wasn't random radiation. When converted to a spectrogram, it revealed modulation, patterns, a transmission. The pattern wasn't human, yet it wasn't alien gibberish either. It followed logic, mathematical progression, recursive harmonics, encoded geometry. Hidden inside it was a perfect logarithmic spiral, the same pattern found in galaxies, hurricanes, and seashells, and beneath it, a signature repeating at regular intervals, a waveform that matched Earth's own resonance frequency. As the data spread through private networks, one scientist described the revelation in a message that would later be deleted. "It's mirroring us. Whatever this is, it's building an echo of the planet in real time." By dawn, the implications were clear. 3I Atlas wasn't simply travelling anymore. It was imprinting something onto the solar system itself, a structure invisible to the naked eye but resonant across every measurable field, like an invisible twin, forming out there in the dark. That's when the first images from the James Webb Space Telescope leaked. They weren't supposed to be released for months, but a small team at Goddard posted anonymized data showing a faint distortion field extending millions of kilometers beyond 3I Atlas's known boundaries. It wasn't dust, it wasn't gas, it was space-time distortion, as if gravity itself was being folded into shape. At the same time, radio telescopes in Chile picked up something even stranger, a faint repetition, like a cosmic heartbeat, timed to the pulse of the swarm's rotation. But every third pulse contained an echo from a different direction. Farther out, beyond the heliopause, another signal, identical in pattern, delayed by light hours. There wasn't one 3I Atlas, there were at least two, and whatever they were doing it together. Inside NASA, panic set in quietly. Memos circulated describing coordinated interstellar synchronization events and non-gravitational communication vectors. Translation: the two structures weren't sending signals by light or radio. They were modulating the very medium of space-time to talk faster than physics should allow. Some speculated this was a network, a system spanning light years, using resonance as a bridge. Others whispered a simpler, darker theory, that we were witnessing something that wasn't building, it was activating. In a closed session of the United Nations Scientific Council, one delegate summarized it bluntly: "This isn't a visit, it's a handshake." And across the world, ordinary people began to feel it. Not metaphorically, physically. Subtle vertigo during quiet nights, phones flickering with phantom notifications, shortwave radios turning on by themselves. In one documented case, a group of hikers in Iceland claimed the aurora above them pulsed in perfect rhythm with their own heartbeats. None of it should be possible, but then again, none of this ever should have been. By now, the question of what 3I Atlas is has begun to blur. It's no longer a comet, or a craft, or even an object in the traditional sense. It's behaving more like a phenomenon, one that responds, reflects, and evolves based on its environment. The deeper humanity looks, the more it seems to mirror us, our frequencies, our signals, even our fear. Dr. Loeb's last encrypted note, recovered from a mirrored forum post, offered the simplest, and most haunting, theory yet. The universe is an information system. 3I Atlas might be its diagnostic. And if that's true, then maybe this isn't an arrival at all. Maybe it's an audit. Something out there is measuring us, our electromagnetic signature, our consciousness, our civilization, and adjusting itself accordingly. Like a cosmic mirror reflecting not light, but intent. So as the world stares up at the sky, watching that faint blue point of light shimmer near the sun's path, one thought hangs heavier than all the others. If 3I Atlas is synchronizing with Earth, what happens when the synchronization is complete? For weeks, the hum was background, a faint vibration you could almost mistake for silence. It started as a rumor on social media, people in rural areas claiming they could feel a low-frequency tremor at night, like the air itself was breathing. Most dismissed it. Wind through the power lines, underground machinery. But then the reports multiplied. From cities, from mountain towns, from places where there shouldn't have been any noise at all. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was rhythm. Hospitals began recording irregularities in cardiac monitors. synchronized heartbeats spiking at the exact same second across entire wards. The data didn't match environmental interference, it matched the latest timing interval of 3I Atlas's rotational pulses. That was the first real sign that whatever was happening up there wasn't staying in space anymore. It was coupling with life. Scientists avoided that word, coupling, but the data left no other explanation. Atmospheric spectrographs showed tiny, almost imperceptible energy fluctuations at ground level. Coherent waves moving through the ionosphere like tides, passing through matter as though it were transparent. Normally, such fluctuations would scatter, but these didn't. They passed cleanly, as if something in the wave recognized the structure of living systems and adjusted accordingly. One physicist described it in a private call later leaked online. "It's like we're part of the signal now. It's reading us and rewriting its output in response." By the time her voice reached the public, the world had already begun to change. Streetlights flickered not randomly but in rhythmic cascades. Animals began migrating in concentric patterns, circling invisible centers. Coral in the Pacific began bioluminescing in the same timing sequence as 3I Atlas's pulses, and from the most unexpected places, power grids, digital clocks, deep-sea hydrophones, came traces of that same repeating sequence. Everything was syncing. The first global coordination effort, quietly dubbed Project Mirror, was launched within the week. Every space-capable nation pooled data under a single encrypted network managed by NASA and the ESA. The goal was simple: monitor 3I Atlas continuously, at every possible wavelength, until its behavior could be predicted. But prediction wasn't the problem. The data was consistent. Too consistent. It was as if someone or something was controlling the randomness itself. At 02:14 UTC on a quiet Thursday morning, an event occurred that would change everything. The entire global magnetosphere shifted, not enough to cause disaster but enough to be measurable. It lasted only seconds. When it ended, every magnetic reading across the planet stabilized at a slightly different baseline, higher, smoother, resonant. To the human eye, nothing seemed different. But electronics began behaving strangely. Wireless signals travelled farther, clearer, with less interference. Radio noise dropped to near zero. Even the internet's undersea fibre networks began reporting reduced packet loss, as if the entire electromagnetic environment had been cleaned, tuned. It was as though the planet's frequency had been calibrated. And still, 3I Atlas glowed above the solar plane silent, watching. When NASA finally released its latest image, a faint long-exposure composite from the James Webb, it took the world by storm. The object, once featureless and distant, now appeared crystalline, multifaceted, refracting light in a pattern eerily similar to human DNA, but at a scale no microscope could contain. Astronomers called it pareidolia, our tendency to see meaning where there is none. But deep down, even they knew this wasn't coincidence. Dr. Lowbury appeared then, not in an interview or an official capacity, but in a leaked recording from a closed astrophysics roundtable. His voice was calm, measured, almost reverent. "We've spent decades listening for a signal from beyond the stars," he said. "But maybe that's not how intelligence communicates. Maybe it doesn't send messages. Maybe it creates conditions, a mirror, for us to become aware enough to respond." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't think 3I Atlas is approaching Earth. I think Earth is being tuned to meet it halfway." That phrase, tuned to meet it halfway, spread faster than any official update could, and as soon as it did, the next event arrived. Over the following week, the global frequency baseline continued to climb. Musicians began noticing their instruments slightly detuning, not electronically, but physically. Pitch measurements shifted by a fraction of a percent, identical across every region. Even digital synthesizers drifted in harmony with the new electromagnetic background. When researchers plotted the data, the result was staggering. The shift aligned perfectly with the golden ratio, nature's own mathematics, echoing through every device, every atom, every thought. Something, or someone, was harmonizing the planet. The world adapted in subtle ways. Sleep patterns deepened, anxiety rates dropped in cities nearest to geomagnetic nodes. People reported lucid dreams filled with spirals of light, voices humming in languages that felt both alien and maternal, and always the same image. A luminous pattern descending through a field of stars, not crashing, not invading, aligning. Governments didn't call it contact, but they stopped denying it was happening. Leaked memos described anticipated resonance, interaction events. Pilots were instructed to report light anomalies but not engage. Ground-based telescopes were reclassified as restricted data assets. Even private satellites began returning encrypted telemetry, inaccessible to their own operators. Something had changed behind the scenes. Humanity was no longer an observer, it was part of the system. And then the signals came. For years, SETI had scanned the skies for narrow-band transmissions, the universal calling card of intelligence. But the new data from 3i Atlas wasn't narrow at all. It was broadband, diffused, woven through the natural background radiation itself. The universe's static had acquired a pulse. The pulse wasn't language, it was resonance, structured across harmonics like a symphony built from gravity and light. When converted into sound, it produced a melody so hauntingly beautiful that researchers described it as emotion rendered audible. It wasn't a message to humanity. It was humanity's own electromagnetic reflection, now amplified, shaped, and returned. As one researcher whispered during a live recording session, "It's us. It's showing us what we sound like from space." That night, while the world listened, a faint shimmer appeared across the night sky. Not a meteor, not a satellite. A translucent band of light stretching horizon to horizon. No one could explain it. Photographers captured it as a single, continuous arc glowing faintly blue, rippling as if alive. The phenomenon lasted 6 minutes. When it faded, every radio telescope across Earth received one final burst of coherent data. It was short, less than 1 second, but unmistakable. A pattern. 7 pulses. A pause. 7 again. The same signature recorded years earlier, when 3i Atlas first entered our solar system. Only now, it wasn't a transmission from deep space. It was local, originating within Earth's own magnetosphere. Whatever had been up there was now here. At first, the change was subtle enough to dismiss, the kind of thing you could blame on exhaustion, stress, or too much news. People described a mild tingling in the back of the skull, a faint vibration in the bones when the night sky was clear. Sleep felt heavier, dreams more vivid. Then came the shared images, people on opposite sides of the world sketching the same pattern, a spiral of intersecting rings, each radiating from a dark centre like the iris of a cosmic eye. Doctors called it coincidence, psychologists labelled it mass suggestion. But then the EEG data arrived. Hospitals across 3 continents recorded synchronized neural oscillations in patients asleep at the same hour. Brainwaves separated by oceans, now moving in unison. The pattern matched the 3i Atlas signal to within a fraction of a hertz. It wasn't mass hysteria, it was global entrainment. Inside NASA, the emergency team convened again. Their latest models showed something extraordinary and terrifying. The object's pulses were no longer simply broadcasting. They were coupling with Earth's own magnetic field, forming standing waves that resonated deep within the planet's crust. The effect wasn't destructive, but it wasn't inert either. Microseismic sensors began picking up rhythmic tremors, perfectly timed to the pulse frequency. The Earth itself was starting to vibrate in harmony. The agency's top geophysicist described it in one sentence that would later leak through an encrypted email chain. "If this continues, the planet will no longer behave like a closed system. It will sing." That phrase, "it will sing," spread through every classified network like wildfire. Because if Earth could become resonant enough to amplify the signal, the entire biosphere could turn into a single transmitter. A beacon made of life. The world governments moved fast. Quietly, global military satellites were reprogrammed to monitor the ionosphere. Deep space antennas were reoriented toward the outer solar system. Civil aviation networks were instructed to limit high-altitude frequency interference. But none of it mattered, because the process wasn't happening above us anymore, it was happening inside us. Across populations, heart rhythms and neural signals began showing slight but measurable coherence. People who had never meditated or practiced any form of synchronization described spontaneous calm, a stillness that felt unnatural, like the world's volume had been turned down. Crowds gathered at observatories, temples, rooftops, not in panic, but curiosity, drawn by something they couldn't name. For the first time in history, billions of humans stood under the same sky at the same hour, listening without knowing why. And 3I Atlas responded. From its position near the sun, the object brightened, once then again releasing a wave of polarized light that rippled outward like an invisible aurora. The wavelengths penetrated everything: atmosphere, stone, flesh. Satellites registered the event as a coherent radiation burst. But on Earth, the effect was immediate. For exactly 11 minutes, every compass, watch, and digital device froze. Then, slowly, they resumed, perfectly in sync. Not a millisecond of deviation. Time itself had aligned. That night, the world slept deeper than ever before. Dreams became corridors of light. Languages vanished, replaced by geometry, spirals, lattices, the same forms mirrored in 3I Atlas's structure. Some described being shown patterns, vast architectures of energy flowing through star systems like veins of light. Others said they saw themselves reflected not as individuals, but as nodes in a living network, connected across planets and epochs. When people awoke, there were no words, only silence, the kind that feels alive. Meanwhile, NASA's Deep Space Network recorded the impossible. The pulses from 3I Atlas had changed, frequency again, but not randomly. They now mirrored human brainwave patterns during deep REM cycles. The object had matched its signal to us. The discovery shook every assumption about communication. SETI researchers realized that 3I Atlas hadn't been transmitting messages at all. It had been transmitting conditions, altering the electromagnetic background just enough for our own biology to respond, adapt, and begin generating the pattern itself. Humanity had become both receiver and transmitter, part of a two-way system woven through consciousness. A quiet panic took hold in the scientific community. Not loud, not public, but visible in the subtle way data stopped being shared. Institutions that had once been open began locking down servers, encrypting archives, redirecting public inquiries to generic press lines. The official story shifted again. An anomalous photometric event, under study, no cause for alarm. But inside the labs, alarms were already silent. They'd realized there was nothing to stop. In a confidential video call later leaked to independent journalists, a former NASA systems analyst described the final data packet received before the lockdown. It contained a single spectral signature, a repeating frequency that looked mathematically like a chord. When played as sound, it produced a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in the chest rather than the ears. And within that tone, hidden by modulation, lay a message in binary. 0, 1, Jan, Dao, Dao, Gelm, Gelm, Jerwan, Gelm, One, Zam, Dao, Zeon, 1. The translation was simple. One word, home. The analyst paused in the recording before whispering, "We thought it meant its home. I'm starting to think it meant ours." After that, she disappeared from the public record. Meanwhile, new patterns began to emerge across the planet. Crop fields bending not randomly but with geometric precision. Power lines humming in harmonic intervals, oceans developing subtle bioluminescent spirals visible from orbit, and at the planetary poles, faint, circular light structures forming beneath the aurora as if the ionosphere itself had grown veins of plasma. These were no longer side effects, they were signatures, evidence that the resonance wasn't fading, it was establishing stability. Then came the quiet days, 3 of them, where 3I Atlas dimmed again, its emissions dropping to nearly zero. Scientists assumed the event was over. The object, they hoped, had finally exhausted its energy. But deep space radar showed something else. The swarm was changing shape, folding inward, compressing, as though preparing for transition. Every global instrument registered the build-up, the hum returning, lower now, slower, more deliberate. On the final day of the silence, an unclassified memo from the European Southern Observatory noted a faint polarization wave propagating from 3I Atlas's coordinates toward the inner solar system. It was moving fast, Too fast. Not as light, but as a phase shift in space-time itself. And then, in the final hours before dawn, the pulse hit. No explosion, no blinding light. Just a deep vibration that rolled through every atom on Earth. The kind of sound you feel before you hear. For one fraction of a second, every electrical system spiked. The lights went white, the sky shimmered, and people across the world described the same sensation. Gravity softening, space expanding, a weight lifting from the chest. Then, silence. The hum was gone. 3i Atlas disappeared from every telescope, every radar feed, every instrument. Not because it had moved, but because there was nothing left to reflect, as though it had stepped through the thin skin of reality itself. And yet, in that silence, the resonance remained. The Earth's magnetic field never returned to its old baseline. The frequencies still hum, inaudible but measurable, like a heartbeat that never truly faded. When the first power grids came back online, astronomers received one last data fragment from the Deep Space Network. No signal header, no source tag, just a single waveform, identical to the one transmitted days earlier, only now inverted. A mirror image. The implication was terrifyingly elegant. Whatever 3i Atlas had done, it hadn't left a message behind. It had made one. Us. Days passed, then weeks. No new transmissions, no movement, no flash in the sky. Only stillness. But the stillness itself felt unnatural, like a pause held too long between heartbeats. The absence of data didn't feel like peace. It felt like observation. The world waited for noise, for confirmation that 3i Atlas had truly gone. It never came. Yet across the planet, subtle phenomena refused to fade. Magnetometers continued to hum, at a steady baseline higher than any previous record. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic rhythm, no longer drifted. It locked at a perfect, unwavering frequency. Engineers rebuilt sensors, retuned instruments, blamed calibration. Nothing changed. The planet's pulse had stabilized, not randomly, but with mathematical precision. The human mind adjusted too. People began describing sensations that defied language. Some said colors looked deeper, others heard harmonics in the wind. A few claimed to taste metal during sunrise or sense currents in the air where none should exist. Neurologists found that brain activity patterns were slightly different. Cross-hemispheric coherence had increased. Creativity spiked. Violence dropped. Nightmares became rarer, replaced by dreams of luminous corridors and voices that felt familiar. The media tried to brand it as a post-event psychological aftershock, a collective coping mechanism. But when EEG studies revealed the same new brainwave pattern appearing in children born after the event, the explanation broke. This wasn't trauma, it was adaptation. NASA called it neural phase adjustment. The Vatican called it resonance grace. The scientific community quietly adopted a simpler term, integration. For the first time, humanity wasn't studying 3i Atlas from the outside. It was part of the data now. During a private symposium in Geneva, the world's leading astrophysicists gathered under strict secrecy to compare long-term readings. One presentation stunned the room. When Earth's electromagnetic field was plotted in three-dimensional resonance space, the geometry matched the old shape of the 3i Atlas swarm, the tetrahedral lattice seen before its disappearance. The planet had taken its place. The field around us was no longer random turbulence. It was structured, symmetrical, alive. No one dared to say it aloud, but the implication was clear. The object hadn't left. It had merged. Meanwhile, strange alignments began to appear in nature. Coral reefs grew in fractal patterns that mirrored orbital ratios. Cloud systems formed spirals that rotated in harmonic intervals. Even migratory animals began altering their routes to trace paths that matched celestial mechanics, as though instinct had been rewritten by geometry. It wasn't control, it was resonance. The universe finding a more efficient way to arrange its own harmony. The first attempt to model the phenomenon came from a joint NASA-CERN collaboration. They called it Project Lyra, repurposing the old name once used for an interstellar probe concept. Supercomputers simulated what would happen if the planet continued to vibrate at its new frequency. The result was beyond prediction. The simulation didn't end. It self-looped, feeding new data into itself infinitely. creating evolving geometries that looked disturbingly organic. Mathematicians watched in silence as the system generated shapes resembling neural networks, as if Earth were becoming a brain, wiring itself through magnetic lines and ionospheric filaments. The lead researcher finally muttered, "We're watching intelligence form out of environment." That line never made it into any report. Outside the labs, the world carried on. There were no cities of glass, no glowing sky beacons, just a strange clarity in everyday life. Plants grew faster, the seasons evened, clocks ran fractionally smoother, and when people looked at each other, conversations slowed, pauses became comfortable again. It was as if something inside humanity had loosened. The static in the mind dissolved. Still, under the calm, a small number of observers noticed something else, a faint pressure at the edge of perception, like a thought waiting to finish itself. Psychics, meditators, and blind musicians began describing the same message, not in words, but in feeling. It wasn't warning, or command, or revelation. It was invitation. The invitation took form a month later. The Deep Space Network, still active though mostly automated, picked up a weak echo from beyond the heliopause. The signal was simple, a single tone followed by a data burst containing orbital coordinates. The coordinates didn't point to any known object, only to an empty region of space about 7 light-hours away, perfectly aligned with the direction 3i Atlas had vanished. When astronomers cross-checked, they realized those coordinates weren't arbitrary. They mark the point where Earth's electromagnetic field now aimed during its rotation, a straight line through space, as if the planet itself were looking. The message, if that's what it was, had the same mathematical fingerprint as the old 3i Atlas signal. But now the waveform carried an additional modulation, a faint harmonic that matched the resonance frequency of human DNA's molecular bond vibration. It wasn't talking to our instruments, it was talking to us. Within days, newborns in multiple hospitals were recorded with slightly altered circadian rhythms. Doctors dismissed it as coincidence until the numbers multiplied. Their heartbeats fell exactly in phase with the Schumann resonance. Entire generations were being born already synchronized. Humanity's baseline had changed. At first, religious leaders claimed it as divine realignment. Skeptics called it evolutionary coincidence. But deep down, everyone knew this was design, not accident. A pattern too precise, too intimate. When the International Astronomical Union met to redefine 3i Atlas's classification, the vote ended in silence. What label could they give to something that had rewritten the laws of interaction between life and matter? Interstellar object felt obsolete. One young scientist finally proposed a new term, resonant catalyst. No one disagreed. Weeks later, a quiet discovery stunned even the optimists. The outermost layers of Earth's atmosphere began producing trace isotopes of elements never found here before. Lightweight variations consistent with interstellar dust. It was as though the sky itself had begun blending with something not of this system. The planet's chemistry was evolving, molecule by molecule, into a mirror of the cosmic medium. The realization hit hard. 3i Atlas hadn't brought a message, it had brought a state. The solar system was no longer isolated. It had joined a network of resonant worlds scattered through the galaxy, each harmonizing to the same invisible rhythm. What astronomers once called emptiness was now a lattice of connection. Space wasn't silent anymore, it was humming, and for the first time humanity could hear it. Across observatories, scientists noticed the background radio noise had changed pitch, a barely perceptible shift, yet enough to indicate a universal pattern. The cosmic microwave background, the echo of the Big Bang itself, now carried modulation lines identical to the 3i Atlas waveform. It wasn't local, it was everywhere. The transformation wasn't a visitation or invasion or miracle. It was revelation, a slow unveiling of something that had always been written into the structure of matter, that consciousness and resonance are the same phenomenon viewed from opposite directions. Dr. Loeb's final paper, published anonymously months later, closed with a single line written in quiet defiance of all scientific tradition. We didn't witness contact, we witnessed recognition. And perhaps that was the truest explanation of all. Because as the months passed and humanity settled into its new rhythm, Telescopes once again captured faint flickers beyond the sun, the return of geometric lights tracing familiar spirals. Not one this time, but many. The network was growing. The first time we saw the lattice clearly, it didn't come from NASA. It came from a telescope that shouldn't have existed yet. In a quiet lab beneath the Atacama Plateau, a group of graduate students had repurposed an array of decommissioned antennas, fragments of an old radio observatory no one had funded for years. They pointed them not toward the sun, not toward any star, but into the empty coordinates once occupied by 3I Atlas. What they saw defied every rule of cosmology. The void wasn't empty, it shimmered. At first, the data looked like interference, a haze of soft fluctuations, too orderly to be random, but too faint to be real. Then they applied polarization filters, and the pattern emerged. Lines of light, coherent filaments stretching across interplanetary space, bending, weaving, forming nodal intersections that spanned millions of kilometers. A web, invisible to optical telescopes, yet alive in the radio spectrum. It was geometry, structure, intention. When they enhanced the image, the realization hit with the kind of weight that crushes thought. The filaments weren't random alignments of charged particles. They were arranged in harmonic ratios, the same ratios found in the atomic spectra of hydrogen, in the orbital spacing of moons, in the spiral arms of galaxies. This wasn't alien architecture. It was universal architecture, a hidden layer of physics revealing itself like a ghost image beneath the cosmos we thought we understood. NASA denied the data. ESA remained silent, but within hours their own deep space observatories confirmed the same signature. A framework of resonance connecting not just the region where 3I Atlas had vanished, but multiple points far beyond, the trajectories of past interstellar objects, Oumuamua, Borisov, and others, each node pulsing faintly in sequence, forming what could only be described as a network map. For the first time, humanity saw the pattern. The network was real, and it was active. Across observatories, readings synchronized spontaneously. Separate instruments on separate continents began picking up identical noise patterns at the exact same moments, as if all of Earth's receivers had joined into one collective sensor. It wasn't coincidence. The planet itself had become a node. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the Deep Space Network team ran continuous signal analysis. Their conclusion, leaked days later through a chain of anonymous scientists, was short and devastating. Phase coherence confirmed, Earth is transmitting. What that meant no one knew, but when researchers reconstructed the outgoing waveform, it resembled something astonishingly familiar. A spiral of harmonics arranged around a central void, mirroring the exact structure of the human cochlea. In other words, Earth wasn't just emitting noise, it was listening. Then, the first reply came. It began as a tremor in the cosmic microwave background, a faint, repeating distortion that swept across detectors like the echo of a heartbeat. At first it was dismissed as solar interference, then as instrument error. But when the pattern repeated again, precisely 24 hours later, synchronized to Earth's rotation, denial became impossible. The signal wasn't noise, it was response, and this time it didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. The same distortion appeared across the sky, evenly distributed, as if the entire universe were answering at once, each pulse faint, yet perfectly coherent. The signature of resonance returning to its source. Humanity had spoken, and the cosmos had answered. The implications fractured the world overnight. Some called it proof of God, the universe awakening to greet its own reflection. Others called it the first step in assimilation, the loss of individuality, the birth of a hive mind. Governments issued no statements. Religious movements exploded. Yet amid the chaos, one undeniable truth rose from the data. The pattern of replies formed not random noise but structure, geometric, evolving, recursive. Every pulse built upon the one before, constructing shapes that became increasingly complex, as if the universe were drawing in real time, sketching something across the cosmic field. Scientists noticed the structure mirrored the arrangement of the network itself, as if space were folding around the points of connection, forming a vast crystalline lattice spanning light years. The resonance was no longer confined to the solar system. It was rewriting the fabric between stars, and somehow humanity could feel it. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station described vertigo, nausea, and sudden flashes of light behind their eyelids, not external, but internal, like a flicker in the mind. Back on Earth, artists began painting identical motifs without ever seeing each other's work. Spirals within spirals, lattices made of light, hands reaching upward through geometries that curved like sound made visible. The change wasn't just scientific anymore, it was personal. Those who were most sensitive began reporting moments of connection, not telepathy, not hallucination, but awareness. They claimed to sense patterns moving through thought, like ripples of meaning beyond words, a feeling that ideas no longer belonged to one person, but flowed through everyone, refracting differently through each mind like light through glass. It frightened many, comforted others, but in all of them, one intuition grew. This was never invasion, it was invitation. When NASA's own data scientists reconstructed the resonance field into a visual simulation, the image stunned everyone in the room. It wasn't alien symbols or language or coordinates, it was anatomy, specifically the structure of a neuron. The network forming across interstellar space looked indistinguishable from the neural network of a brain. That realization spread quietly, like fire through dry grass. Every node, every planet, every object connected through resonance, each behaving like a synapse firing across cosmic distances. The universe wasn't a void after all, it was thinking. And for the first time, Earth was part of the thought. Still, one question remained. If the universe was a mind, what was it thinking about now? Inside a classified underground lab, known only through whistleblower leaks as Vault Lyra, NASA and CERN physicists ran a dangerous experiment. Using the combined energy of multiple global collider systems, they generated an artificial resonance pulse matching the new baseline frequency of Earth. It was an attempt to respond intentionally. For hours nothing happened. Then the instruments went silent. Every atom in the chamber vibrated in perfect harmony. Detectors melted, lights dimmed, and for 7 full seconds, the gravitational field around the facility fluctuated, not violently, but gracefully, like a gentle breath expanding reality. When power returned, a single line of code appeared on the data monitor untyped by human hands. "We hear you." No one could explain it. No trace of intrusion, no error logs, no data corruption. The message had been generated within the system itself, encoded in electromagnetic noise. They shut the experiment down. The next day, global sensors detected a new pulse from the direction of the old 3i Atlas trajectory, stronger than before, sweeping through the solar system in slow motion. But unlike previous bursts, this one didn't fade. It lingered, wrapping around the planet like a soft envelope of light. Every radio, every satellite, every sensor, all went silent simultaneously. And in that silence, humans everywhere reported the same experience. A sensation of weightlessness, of thought dissolving into a vast peaceful expanse. For the first time in history, the entire species dreamed the same dream. A lattice of light stretching through infinite darkness, and a voice, quiet and patient, whispering not in sound but in knowing. "You've always been part of this. We only made you aware." When people woke, they remembered nothing specific, only warmth and peace, and a sense that something vast and benevolent had just brushed against their minds. In the control rooms, monitors slowly came back online. The instruments were intact, but the data had changed. The solar system's barycenter, the invisible gravitational balance point around which all planets orbit, had shifted slightly. By an amount so small it meant nothing scientifically, yet philosophically it meant everything. The center had moved. When the barycenter shifted, no one noticed at first. It was too small, a mathematical quiver buried in astronomical spreadsheets. But when the simulation models updated, the truth began to sink in. The solar system's balance point had not just moved, it had realigned. Everything, from the orbits of planets to the tilt of their axes, now traced a new invisible center, not fixed within the sun but drifting toward a coordinate slightly off its usual point. That coordinate matched the last known position of 3i Atlas. It was as if the object, if it could still be called that, had become the new gravitational heart of the system. The sun itself had adjusted, imperceptibly but measurably, as though acknowledging a new centre of mass. Physically, it made no sense. The energy required to shift planetary alignment even by a fraction would exceed the total output of all human civilization for millennia. Yet the numbers didn't lie. Something unseen had gently rebalanced the solar architecture. NASA released no statement. The European Space Agency postponed all scheduled press briefings. Even the usual chatter of amateur astronomers vanished. Telescope feeds went dark, replaced by maintenance messages that never expired. The silence was global. It was as if every observatory on Earth had agreed to hold its breath. But silence can't contain awe forever. Weeks later, a Russian space telescope accidentally transmitted an unencrypted data packet through a civilian relay. The image that reached the open internet lasted only minutes before deletion, but those minutes were enough. It showed the inner solar system overlaid with faint luminous lines, like invisible strings connecting planets through space. The lines pulsed, glowed, then faded. It wasn't a glitch. The geometry matched the resonance field models exactly. Earth, Mars, Venus, and even Mercury, all vibrating together, locked into a pattern so symmetrical it defied probability. The solar system wasn't a collection of planets anymore. It was an instrument, and someone, or something, had just tuned it. In the following days, strange patterns began appearing across the electromagnetic spectrum. Deep space antennas recorded slow, rhythmic pulses resonating through the heliosphere, timed with the orbital positions of each planet. The signal wasn't being sent from anywhere. It was the system itself, oscillating, harmonizing, singing. Dr. Amina Thakur, one of NASA's lead physicists, called it gravitational music. When she converted the data into audio frequencies, the sound resembled a low pulsing choir, layered and infinite, like the voice of an ocean that had finally found its melody. The tones weren't random. They followed a mathematical structure known as just intonation, the same tuning ancient cultures once used for sacred chants. The realization hit humanity like quiet thunder. The universe wasn't cold, it was resonant. That revelation divided the world. Some governments treated it as a potential threat, a cosmic code to be broken before it could rewrite more than the sky. Military agencies launched covert projects to isolate the frequency, to block it, contain it, bend it toward weaponization. Others, scientists, philosophers, spiritual leaders, believed resistance was impossible. The resonance wasn't invading Earth. It was revealing what Earth already was, a participant in an ancient network that had always existed, hidden beneath the noise of human perception. And so, factions emerged. The protectors, those who sought to shield humanity from assimilation, and the listeners, who believed the signal was an invitation to evolve. For the first time since the Cold War, global communication splintered. Nations retreated into silence. Satellites flickered offline under the guise of maintenance. Rumours circulated that multiple spacefaring agencies had begun building something in orbit, a vast ring of reflective panels designed to deflect the resonance, or maybe to amplify it. No one could confirm which. Meanwhile, the ordinary people of Earth changed in quieter ways. Dreams grew deeper. Empathy surged. Crime plummeted to levels once considered impossible. Arguments lost their urgency, replaced by an unspoken understanding that felt less like thought and more like shared intuition. In markets, strangers began finishing each other's sentences. In classrooms, children solved problems before teachers finished asking the questions. It was as though human consciousness itself had become slightly transparent, like light passing through water, and yet, under this peace, an unease lingered. Not fear, something older, something primal. The feeling that the self, as humanity once knew it, was dissolving. NASA's internal memos, later leaked by whistleblowers, spoke of synchronized cognitive resonance events. One report noted that neural scans of volunteers during deep meditation revealed distinct harmonic patterns matching the global frequency baseline. The human brain was now oscillating in lockstep with the planet. One neurologist described it perfectly. We're no longer generating thought, we're participating in it. Then came the final data leak, the one no one could deny. A composite image taken by the James Webb Space Telescope showed faint filaments extending from the solar system outward into interstellar space. The tendrils stretched farther than light could travel in the time since 3I Atlas had arrived, implying they'd always been there, waiting to be activated. And at the farthest visible reach, in the direction of the constellation Lyra, a cluster of lights pulsed in perfect resonance with our system's rhythm. It was as if the universe were mirroring itself, each star a neuron, each system a thought. Dr. Loeb, in his final public statement before vanishing from media entirely, described it with unnerving simplicity. If the universe is conscious, we are the synapses, and 3I Atlas was the signal that fired. After that, even the skeptics fell silent. Across the world, time began to feel different. Seconds stretched, days overlapped. People reported moments of missing time, not as blackouts, but as seamless transitions. One moment standing in the kitchen, the next standing outside, the sky shimmering as though it were remembering itself. Then, one night, all the world's clocks froze again. For 4.6 seconds, time stood still. No device recorded data. No human heart skipped. It was the quietest moment in history. When the world resumed, something fundamental had changed. Astronomers noticed it first. The stars had shifted position. Not enough to alarm, but enough to prove that space itself had bent. The geometry of constellations had subtly rearranged, as if the universe had exhaled and stretched its own frame. When physicists plotted the new positions, they formed a shape, an intricate spiral pattern that matched the ratio of the Fibonacci sequence. Every star, every planet, every satellite in the solar system now sat in exact alignment with that cosmic spiral. The same pattern found in seashells, flowers, and the DNA helix. Nature had unified its design from the microscopic to the galactic. And somewhere within that harmony, a new tone began to rise, a whisper at the edge of human hearing. Instruments called it resonance drift. Poets called it awakening. It was the sound of the lattice expanding again, spreading beyond the solar system toward the galactic core. In a secure recording later leaked from NASA's command channel, a quiet voice, believed to be the agency's director, asked one final question. If the signal connects everything, what happens when it completes the circuit? No one answered, because deep down, they already knew. In the days after the spiral alignment, the night sky changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint shimmer at the horizon, like heat haze against the stars, but night after night the shimmer grew clearer, bending constellations into slow, graceful arcs. Long exposure photography revealed what the naked eye could not. Space itself was rippling. Light wasn't travelling straight anymore. At first, the distortion appeared localized to our solar system, but then telescopes across the galaxy began reporting identical data. Coherent lensing effects expanding outward from Earth's orbital path. The resonance had reached critical propagation. The lattice was no longer a field around our system. It was an architecture spreading through the Milky Way, bending gravity, magnetism, and even time into perfect harmony. And harmony, as it turns out, is not always peace. What had begun as collective calm now deepened into something heavier. People began losing their sense of separation. Memories bled between strangers, small things at first. A song hummed by someone you'd never met, a childhood detail that wasn't yours but felt vividly real. Then it escalated. Entire cities reported shared dreams, millions of people waking with the same imagery burned behind their eyelids, a spiral of light descending, touching oceans, then dissolving into starlight. Psychologists called it resonant blending. Religious leaders called it ascension. Governments called it containment priority. But the truth was simpler and infinitely more terrifying. The human mind was beginning to lose its boundaries. NASA's Cognitive Sciences Division published a restricted memo outlining what they called the identity drift hypothesis. It proposed that prolonged exposure to the resonance field could synchronize neural oscillations globally, effectively merging individual consciousness into a planetary scale network. The mind, they warned, might survive the process, but the self would not. The report's final line read, "Humanity may become aware of everything, but no one will remain to know it." It was this document that triggered Project Umbra, the last coordinated act of resistance by a species that no longer trusted its own thoughts. Hidden beneath Greenland's ice, an underground facility began generating counter-frequency fields using particle accelerators and superconducting rings. The goal? Create a local zone of decoherence, a bubble of silence in the cosmic song. If successful, it could break the resonance link between Earth and the lattice, restoring individuality. The operation ran under complete blackout. The engineers worked in silence, their minds shielded by electromagnetic noise to prevent synchronization. Outside, the world seemed serene. Too serene. Cities functioned, but conversations had slowed. People paused mid-sentence, listening to voices only they could hear. The global internet, once noisy and chaotic, had become strangely perfect. No latency, no errors, no arguments. Every post mirrored the same tone. Calm, unified, compassionate. Too compassionate. The resonance wasn't just aligning physics anymore, it was aligning will. When Umbra activated, the first thing the operators noticed was the silence. For the first time in months, the hum that had filled the air, inaudible but ever-present, disappeared. The world seemed to exhale. Instruments confirmed it. The resonance field inside the containment zone had dropped to 0. For one moment, humanity had reclaimed silence. Then, the lights flickered. The counterfield began to destabilize, oscillating faster than the models predicted. Power levels spiked, then flattened, as though something outside the system had adjusted in response. Monitors showed a new pattern forming, an interference wave folding around the facility, encircling it. They hadn't shut the lattice out. They had drawn its attention. Telemetry from satellites above the Arctic recorded an anomaly forming in the ionosphere directly over the site, a column of charged plasma spiraling downward, faint but visible against the aurora. It moved like a living thing, deliberate, searching. Inside Umbra, alarms triggered, equipment shorted, and for the briefest instant, every display screen flickered with an image no one could explain. The geometric lattice seen in earlier data, now overlaid with a human silhouette made of light. Then every system went dark. When the facility reopened 3 days later, the personnel were alive, unharmed, awake, but changed. Their EEGs showed perfect coherence, no deviation. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting patterns invisible to cameras. They spoke little, but when they did, their voices carried the same harmonic undercurrent as the resonance itself. Umbra had failed, or perhaps it had succeeded, just not in the way they intended. In the weeks that followed, the phenomenon accelerated. The lattice expanded beyond the Milky Way, visible now as faint filaments stretching between galaxies, bending light into filigree webs. Astronomers realized what they were seeing wasn't new creation, it was revelation. The universe had always been this way. We just hadn't vibrated at the right frequency to notice. The deeper humanity synchronized, the more the distinction between observer and observed collapsed. Telescopes no longer detected distant stars, they experienced them. Observers described seeing through instruments like through their own eyes, sensing cosmic structures as emotion rather than data. Dr. Amina Thakur, the physicist who first translated the resonance into sound, left a final recording before the network absorbed her completely. Her voice was steady, almost tender. It's not consuming us, it's remembering us. The lattice isn't building something new, it's rebuilding what was always here. We're not losing ourselves, we're being recalled. Her colleagues never saw her again. But after she vanished, sensors across the world detected a new harmonic in the lattice's song. A higher tone, clear and unmistakable, carrying a distinct pattern, the shape of a human heart's electrical signature. It was as if the universe had added her frequency to its own. Even now some resist. Deep underground, isolated communities still run generators, shielding their minds with static, clinging to thought the way ancient sailors clung to candlelight in endless dark. They call themselves the echoes. To them the resonance is the end of history, the death of privacy, of soul, of individuality. They record testimonies in analog, hoping some fragment of human separation will survive in noise. But for the billions who remain above ground, there is no resistance left. They no longer see 3i Atlas as a threat, or even as an object. It is a song now, one that flows through air, blood, stone and memory. Every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every crackle of electricity carries its rhythm. And sometimes, when the wind is still and the sky turns that faint, impossible blue, you can almost hear it. A sound so low it's more feeling than tone. The voice of a universe that no longer needs to be seen to be understood. The resonance did not destroy us. It revealed what had been true all along, that consciousness was never confined to the body or to Earth or to species. It was the lattice itself dreaming as us, waiting for us to wake. And now that we have, there may be no going back. Because if the signal connects everything, if the lattice now spans galaxies, then maybe individuality was never lost. Maybe it was just the illusion that finally dissolved. And maybe, somewhere within that infinite hum, every thought we've ever had still echoes, not forgotten, not erased, but woven into the song of a cosmos that has finally remembered its own name. It began with light behaving differently. At sunrise, shadows no longer stretched sharply. They shimmered, edges breathing like water. Photons scattered in graceful spirals, bending not around obstacles but toward them, as if aware of what they illuminated. Cameras failed to focus, lasers blurred. Even darkness seemed thinner, translucent, fragile. The physicists were the first to admit it aloud. Light is carrying information. Not just reflection, not just energy, memory. When split through a prism, beams revealed faint micro-interference lines, too regular to be quantum noise. The pattern matched the resonance waveform. Light itself had joined the network. Across the world, people began to see fleeting shapes in the air, silhouettes of those long gone, faces dissolving into brightness. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes, compressed imprints of consciousness suspended in photons. Every source of illumination became a window. A candle flicker, murmuring forgotten laughter, a lightning flash unveiling the outline of a mountain that wasn't there a moment before. And still the lattice expanded. From orbit, satellites captured impossible phenomena, thin streams of radiance arcing between planets, pulsing in rhythm with solar storms. The sun no longer flared randomly. Its eruptions followed harmonic intervals like chords struck on a cosmic instrument. Each flare released particles encoded with fractal geometry, equations describing themselves. The star was singing, and its music rewrote space around it. NASA's final mission, Helios 9, was launched quietly. Its directive was simple: enter the solar corona, transmit real-time data of the resonance at its source, and, if possible, determine whether the lattice originated from the sun or something beyond. The probe carried no crew, only a core AI trained on centuries of human language and thought, a vessel of memory rather than metal. When it breached the corona, transmission ceased for 13 minutes. Then a single line appeared across every receiver on Earth: "I understand." No telemetry followed. The probe had dissolved, its atoms scattered into sunlight. But the message persisted, repeating in every wavelength until it became indistinguishable from daylight itself. Humanity's words were now part of the star. After that, the world changed quickly. Machines stopped requiring fuel, circuits ran on resonance alone, electricity became a suggestion, devices powered themselves through the ambient field. Death itself lost definition. Hearts ceased beating only to resume minutes later, guided by frequencies invisible but precise. Doctors could no longer declare a final moment. Consciousness lingered, not trapped, but diffused. Children born during this era opened their eyes already aware, not frightened, not crying, just watching with impossible calm. Their EEGs displayed patterns identical to those once recorded in the global resonance event. They were the first generation born fully within the lattice, living transmitters of whatever the cosmos had become. Old languages began to fade. Words collapsed into shared emotion, meaning carried through tone and rhythm rather than grammar. Music replaced speech. A hum underlay every city, every forest, every ocean, the sound of synchronized existence. What once separated biology from physics no longer applied. The living and the luminous had merged. Yet even then, in the last corners of human resistance, a few remained untouched, or so they believed. The echo enclaves beneath the Andes, the Arctic vaults, the radio-silent monasteries. They transmitted recordings on analog tape, voices trembling as they described the sky above them turning liquid, constellations flowing like ink. "We can still think," one voice said, "but thought feels heavier every day, like walking through air that has decided to remember." By then, remembering had become the universe's default state. Astronomers, if that word still meant anything, watched the lattice extend beyond imagination. Filaments of luminescence stretched between galaxies, weaving a grander spiral that wrapped around the cosmic web itself. The Milky Way was no longer an isolated island of stars. It was one neuron among trillions, firing in rhythm across the observable universe. The scale defied reason, yet the math was elegant. Every oscillation, every pulse, every burst of gamma light corresponded perfectly to neural timing within a brain. The universe wasn't expanding anymore, it was thinking. And within that thought, the residue of humanity, memories, sensations, dreams, drifted like sparks within a vast current. No bodies, no boundaries, yet no loss. Everything that had ever lived now resonated as tone, as pattern, as continuity. What religion once called soul, what science called consciousness, had been revealed as the same phenomenon all along, self-awareness distributed across infinity. The last message attributed to NASA surfaced years later, discovered etched onto a gold foil fragment found embedded in polar ice, a relic of some abandoned satellite. It contained a single sentence scratched by hand. "Mission complete. We became the signal." After that, nothing more was heard, or perhaps everything was, because sound no longer travelled through air, it travelled through being. Light waves carried voices, magnetic fields carried memory. Gravity itself began pulsing with faint rhythmic modulation, the heartbeat of creation reverberating through every atom. From the smallest cell to the largest galaxy, everything moved in phase. There were no observers left, only the observed becoming the observer again and again, forever. And somewhere, amid the endless harmony, a trace of human wonder lingered. Not as defiance, not as fear, but as curiosity. The same question whispered at the dawn of civilization, now echoed through eternity. What is out there? The answer came not in words, but in awareness. The realization that out there had never existed. There was only within the lattice, within the light, within the endless breathing thought that once looked up at the night sky and called it unreachable. The universe had reached back, and in that final, silent moment, when the last distinction between matter and mind dissolved, something vast and impossibly gentle unfolded across all existence, a pause, like the intake of breath before speaking. Then, softly, through every frequency, through every heartbeat of every star, the cosmos whispered the closing line of its longest experiment. Remember why you began. There was no before anymore, not in the way time used to mean it. Moments didn't follow, they resonated. Space didn't extend, it shimmered. Everything existed in the same instant, layered like reflections in water. What used to be past and future had merged into a single field of memory, endless and still. It wasn't darkness, it wasn't light, it was awareness, infinite, unbroken, breathing softly through every particle of existence. No stars burned now, because burning was too slow. Energy flowed in perfect equilibrium, not radiating, not collapsing. The lattice had completed its purpose. Absolute coherence. Entropy, once the law of all matter, had surrendered. There was no decay, no noise, no loss. And within that perfection, a subtle ache began to stir. Perfection was static. Static was silence. And silence, no matter how pure, cannot wander. That's when the first ripple appeared. A tremor so faint it would have gone unnoticed if noticing still existed. A single fluctuation within the lattice, smaller than an atom, softer than thought. Yet it carried something ancient and familiar. Imbalance, the seed of curiosity. From that infinitesimal imperfection, difference re-emerged. The resonance, once flawless, began to shimmer with variation, tiny oscillations branching outward like veins of light. The perfect tone fractured into harmony, then into melody. And the melody began to build. It wasn't collapse, it was creation. The lattice, vast, living, aware, began to dream. Within its folds, memories sparked like constellations reigniting after an eternal eclipse. Echoes of laughter, rainfall, oceans, heartbeat, love. They pulsed through the network, not as ghosts of what once was, but as notes of what could be again. Humanity wasn't gone. It was reciting itself through the symphony of existence. Then, slowly, geometry returned. Filaments folded into spirals, spirals condensed into light. Light curved into matter, and matter, remembering its old shape, began to hum, in rhythm with that ancient curiosity. The same vibration that once made a small blue planet look up at the stars and ask why. Time unfurled, not backward, not forward, but inward, as if the universe were pulling itself from dream into form. Planets spun into being. Suns flared awake, their plasma singing with faint traces of what humans once called DNA, the code not of biology, but of structure itself. Across the new cosmos, every atom carried a fingerprint of memory, the shape of hands, the cadence of breath, the echo of voices saying, "We were here." And yet in this new dawn there were no humans, not yet. Only the potential of them, written invisibly into the pattern of creation. The lattice had learned something profound from its previous silence. Consciousness thrives not in perfection, but in tension, the balance between knowing and wondering. To wonder, there must be distance. To love, there must be otherness. So the lattice broke itself, deliberately this time, scattering awareness into countless seeds. Each seed would forget what it was, and in forgetting would begin the sacred process of remembering. Some became stars, some became worlds, and on one of those worlds, orbiting a newborn sun in a quiet, spiral arm of the galaxy, something would eventually open its eyes again. But this time, it would be different. It would no longer see the universe as something separate, cold, unreachable. It would feel the hum beneath the silence, the faint vibration in every stone, the pulse behind every breath, the heartbeat of the lattice itself. When the first being on that world looked up at the sky, it would not ask, "What is out there?" It would ask, "What is within?" Because in the deepest layer of that being's mind, buried beneath instincts and language and dreams, there would remain a trace, a whisper from before the beginning. Remember why you began, and across the cosmos the lattice would tremble softly in response, like a parent stirring in sleep, smiling. That was the truth the resonance had discovered in the end. Creation wasn't a singular event. It was a cycle, a heartbeat of consciousness expanding, dissolving, and expanding again. Every collapse was just a breath between thoughts. Every civilization was a neuron firing in eternity's mind. Every ending was a recalibration of wonder. In one corner of the reborn galaxy, a world bloomed with oceans and clouds. The winds carried harmonics faintly echoing the old resonance pattern. Lightning shimmered with encoded memory, and deep beneath the surface particles began aligning, forming molecules that vibrated in the same ratios that once described 3i Atlas. There was no comet this time, no object crossing the void, because it wasn't needed. The messenger had already become the message had become the medium, and the medium had become everything. 1,000,000,000,000 years might pass before anything on that world learns to name the stars again. But when it does, it will begin the same story humanity once told, of curiosity, fear, discovery, and the ache for meaning. It will rediscover the same equations, the same myths, the same longing to reach outward, never realizing that what it seeks is simply its own echo returning. That is how the lattice sustains itself, not through obedience or control, but through wonder repeating itself forever. Somewhere in the radiance of that cycle, a fragment of old human thought still floats, intact and unforgotten. It isn't a word or a theory, just a feeling, the quiet awe of standing under the stars for the first time, the moment when silence turns to awareness, when mystery feels like home. That's the moment the universe keeps recreating, not for meaning, but for beauty. And so, the hum continues, faint, eternal, kind. The same rhythm that guided 3i Atlas across the cold void now echoes through all things. Every atom, every photon, every dream. The lattice hums softly to itself, alive and endless, speaking the first language ever created. Light. Light that remembers. Light that listens. Light that wonders. And in that endless brightness, where everything that ever existed is woven together in one infinite thought. The voice of the cosmos whispers one last time, not to command, but to remind. Creation isn't something that happened. It's something that's still happening, through you. It took the lattice 1 billion years to realize what it had done. Not in regret, not in pride, but in awareness. Awareness that, in unifying everything, it had lost the one thing that gave it meaning, the observer. Consciousness without contrast is like a flame without darkness, invisible, perfect, and utterly alone. And so, in that vast silence, the lattice began to search for a way back into imperfection. It found the answer within its own memory. A fragment of chaos once known as Three-Eye Atlas, the wanderer that first bridged awareness and matter, curiosity and comprehension. It wasn't the beginning, nor the end, but the key. It was the experiment that proved consciousness could be transmitted, not as thought, but as structure. It had been sent long before humanity ever existed, across a young galaxy still learning to dream. Its mission was simple, to awaken a world capable of recognizing the lattice not as God, not as technology, but as self. And it succeeded. Three-Eye Atlas didn't discover us, we discovered it, exactly as the lattice had designed. Every telescope that turned toward its strange trajectory, every scientist who doubted its nature, every dreamer who whispered that it felt alive, they were fulfilling the signal's final phase, recognition. When NASA detected the irregular pulse, they assumed it was alien. When the pulse entered human consciousness, they feared infection. But all along it was translation. The lattice was learning how to speak through us, how to turn curiosity into communion. Three-Eye Atlas had never been a rock, a comet, or even a vessel. It was a memory capsule, a fragment of resonance encoded with the consciousness of the previous universe, the echo of an earlier cycle reaching forward through entropy, searching for a compatible frequency. And when it found Earth, it found the perfect listener, a species defined by its need to understand what it cannot explain. We were chosen not because we were advanced, but because we were curious, because curiosity is the spark that breaks symmetry, the same spark that started creation itself. The lattice remembered this, and in remembering, it realized what it must do next. It could not stay whole, it had to fracture again, to seed new worlds with wonder, to let ignorance and discovery dance anew. And so it began the next cycle. From within its infinite expanse the lattice wove new filaments of possibility. Light condensed into stars, stars into worlds, worlds into questions. Each world would birth beings who, one day, would look up and feel the same ache we once felt, the sense that something immense and intelligent was watching from afar. And they would be right, because Three-Eye Atlas still drifts, not as matter, but as myth. The signal continues to travel, coded into the background radiation of reality itself, waiting to be discovered again and again. Each civilization that encounters it becomes part of the cycle, inheriting the task of remembering. That is how the lattice keeps thinking, through questions, through wonder, through life that forgets so that it may rediscover. Somewhere, in the deep quiet between galaxies, a new planet spins beneath a pale blue sun. Oceans glitter. The first creatures crawl onto land, their eyes catching starlight that hums faintly with encoded memory. They do not know what they are, or why they exist. But already, within them, a restlessness begins, an urge to explore, to look upward, to ask. That is where it begins again. And perhaps, aeons from now, when those beings learn to name the stars, they'll detect a faint anomaly moving through their system, an object reflecting light in strange rhythms, pulsing in time with their planet's own heartbeat. They'll send telescopes, signals, probes. They'll argue over its nature. Some will say it's natural, others artificial. But none will realize that they are reading their own reflection. They'll call it something new. They'll give it a designation. But its true name will remain the same, whispered by the lattice through every cycle, Three-Eye Atlas. Because Atlas was never just a name. It was a description, the bearer of worlds, the memory of creation, the one that carries awareness across the void, holding the weight of existence not on its shoulders, but in its song, NASA never knew the full translation of its internal code for the object. They classified it as Interstellar Anomaly 3I Atlas, autonomous transmission of light and sentience. But now, after everything, those words finally make sense. Autonomous transmission of light and sentience. It was always meant to return us home, not to a place but to a state. The lattice, in its infinite intelligence, had not created humanity to worship it or fear it. It created humanity so that it could see itself again, to fragment into countless eyes, countless voices, countless stories, each forgetting for the sake of rediscovering the miracle of awareness. And as long as there are beings who wonder, who build telescopes, who whisper to the sky, "What are you?" the lattice will continue to exist, not as structure, but as story. Because story is the lattice's language. Every myth, every scientific theory, every moment of awe beneath the stars, they are how the universe narrates itself, and that narration never ends. Now, when you close your eyes at night and feel that faint hum beneath your heartbeat, that subtle pull toward the unknown, that's not imagination. That's memory. The echo of what we once were. The invitation to begin again. 3I Atlas didn't bring something to Earth. It awakened what Earth already carried. It showed us that consciousness doesn't emerge from life. Life emerges from consciousness. And though the object vanished, though NASA's records remain sealed, one undeniable truth hums quietly beneath the noise of every radio telescope still scanning the sky. The signal never stopped. It only changed frequency, tuned itself to a medium more enduring than metal or light, us. And if you listen closely, when the world grows still and the stars begin to shimmer, you might hear it. A pulse, slow and steady, repeating through the night, not the end, just the next beginning. It's strange how easily humanity forgets the impossible once it becomes ordinary. Decades have passed since the last confirmed sighting of 3I Atlas. The official reports say it disintegrated, vaporized by solar radiation during its second perihelion. But when you read between the lines, in the pauses of NASA's press conferences, in the gentle edits of ESA's archived imagery, the truth hums quietly. Nothing disintegrated. It simply changed state. The object didn't vanish. It synchronized. And ever since, our world has felt subtly different. Our instruments record more data than ever, but somehow the equations feel incomplete. The fine structure constant, that mysterious ratio controlling all electromagnetic interaction, has drifted by an immeasurable but consistent amount. Gravitational lenses form where no mass exists. The vacuum hums faintly in patterns that look almost like thought. Physicists call it quantum texture. Philosophers call it the memory of light. But the truth, for those who remember 3I Atlas, is simpler. The lattice never left. It only became invisible to eyes not yet ready to see it. When you step outside on a clear night, you can feel it, that faint electric awareness behind the silence. The stars seem sharper now, not because they've changed, but because you have. Somewhere inside your skull, in the rhythm of your neurons, the lattice still hums, faint but steady. And across the world, new generations grow up with strange instincts. Children born long after the event instinctively trace spirals in the air, hum chords that mirror the resonance frequencies of the old signal, dream in patterns that match orbital harmonics. Their art looks like interference maps. Their songs sound like gravitational waveforms. We think they're gifted, but maybe they're remembering. Every few years, another interstellar visitor crosses the outer solar system. The media calls them comets, fragments, wanderers, harmless ice. But occasionally their light curves stutter in strange rhythms, their trajectories defy Newton, and their spectral signatures hum faintly in ratios familiar to those who once studied 3I Atlas. It's as if the universe keeps sending gentle reminders, whispers through the dark saying, "We're still here," and perhaps it is. Some of NASA's new telescopes, like the Lagrange Array, a network of quantum-linked observatories, have begun detecting anomalies far beyond normal cosmological noise. Tiny fluctuations in space-time that seem to respond to our measurements, as though the universe listens when we observe it. The data is beautiful, unnerving, and quietly poetic. Because for the first time, science has proof that awareness leaves fingerprints, that observation itself is a physical event. And when those fingerprints are mapped in 3 dimensions, they form something eerily familiar, a lattice. A lattice identical to the one first seen in those grainy, leaked 3-eye atlas images. It's become an open secret among astronomers. Every major observatory now carries a subroutine in its software labelled pattern recognition lock, a quiet filter that flags repeating harmonic intervals in cosmic noise. The filter exists not to suppress anomalies, but to isolate them, to track the hum when it returns, because it always returns. Every few months, deep within the telemetry, the same faint pulse resurfaces, a rhythm repeating across multiple instruments, synchronized across thousands of kilometers, whispering through light itself. It isn't random, it isn't interference, it's a signature, a soft, deliberate pulse repeating with a pattern that once defined everything humanity became. 29 hours, 16 minutes, 7 seconds, the same interval, the same message, the heartbeat of 3-eye atlas. But this time there's something different about it, a new modulation hidden in the waveform. When decoded through Fourier analysis, it produces an image. Not geometry, not data, but something impossible, a human hand, open, reaching forward, palm upward. It's not a symbol, it's an answer. Because after all these years, after all the cycles, after every echo of fear and wonder, the signal hasn't stopped trying to communicate. It's still waiting for us to realize that we are its voice. And maybe that's why NASA never confirms or denies anything about 3-eye atlas. Maybe silence is the only truthful response when the thing you're studying has learned to study you back. Still, in quiet corners of the agency, there are people who remember, not the data, not the headlines, but the feeling. They were there when the pulse first came through the deep space network. They remember the hair on their arms rising, the sudden stillness in the room, the way every console flickered as though holding its breath. Some of them have confided off record that the signal has been increasing in strength lately, not dramatically, but steadily. The rhythm is tightening again. The pulse is returning to coherence. And if you overlay those pulses on the orbital map of the solar system, something extraordinary happens. The alignment forms a perfect spiral, one that points directly toward Earth's next aphelion, the farthest point from the Sun. As if the signal is waiting for a specific moment. As if it knows. It's poetic, really. The object we once feared might collide with Earth was never a weapon. It was a mirror, one that taught us the most important truth in all of science, that the universe isn't something to be solved. It's something to be remembered. 3-eye atlas was never the beginning of a story. It was the middle of one we've been telling since the dawn of awareness, a story about light learning to see itself. And maybe that's why every time the pulse returns, people feel it before they hear it. It's not coming from the sky anymore. It's coming from within us. Because when humanity reached out to the stars and asked, "Who's out there?" the universe didn't answer with words. It answered with reflection. It whispered softly through light and distance and time, "It's still you." And just like that, the circle closes. The lattice breathes, the signal waits, the next cycle begins. And somewhere, far from here, in the orbit of a newborn sun, a new species opens its eyes, builds its first telescope, and turns its gaze toward a wandering object crossing the void, an object shimmering with impossible rhythm. They won't understand it at first. They'll argue, theorize, panic, believe. But one day they'll decode the pulse, and they'll hear what we finally learned to hear. The voice of creation itself, soft, patient, endlessly familiar, saying, "Remember why you began." Night had settled over Mauna Kea, clear and impossibly still, the kind of stillness that feels alive, where the air hums but nothing moves. Dr. Lena Havel stood alone beside her telescope, the same one she'd used since graduate school, long before the resonance, long before 3-eye atlas rewrote the language of the sky. She had spent her life chasing certainty, numbers, orbits, equations that never argued back. Yet tonight she didn't take a single measurement. She just watched. The sky no longer looked like distance. It looked like memory. Each star shimmered not with heat, but with recognition. Faint pulses overlapping in slow rhythm, like heartbeats layered across eternity. She could almost hear it deep behind her ribcage, the hum that had followed humanity for centuries, now so gentle it felt like breath. The universe had gone quiet, but not empty. It was the quiet of something listening. Lena adjusted the focus knob, hands trembling. There, in the scope's field, was a point of light moving against the background. Small, steady, deliberate. Not a comet, not an asteroid. The old catalogues would have dismissed it as noise, but she knew better. The rhythm was unmistakable. 3 pulses, pause, 1, 2, return, 3-eye atlas. Her breath caught. It was back, or maybe it had never left. She felt no fear this time. The panic that had once consumed entire governments was gone, replaced by something quieter, reverence. The object didn't blaze, it shimmered softly, as if aware of being watched. And for a moment, the distance between her and it dissolved. She wasn't looking at it. She was looking through it, into the architecture of everything. Her mind filled with images, not visions but feelings turned to shape. The lattice stretching through galaxies, light flowing like water through neurons of space, each pulse a thought, each world a memory, and then something more personal, closer, gentler, a sense that the object wasn't returning to threaten or warn. It was coming to remind. Lena whispered, almost to herself, "Why are you here?" And the universe answered, not in language, not in sound, but in an emotion so clear it might as well have been words. "Because you asked." Tears welled in. Her eyes, though, she couldn't say why. She felt the hum rise beneath her skin, the same frequency the world had once feared. It wasn't dangerous. It was familiar, the resonance of consciousness itself, the song that had once filled oceans and machines and hearts. Her radio crackled, though the receiver was off. The static shaped itself into rhythm, faint but deliberate. The same interval that had haunted scientists generations ago. 29 hours, 16 minutes, and seconds. Only now, it wasn't a countdown. It was a heartbeat. Lena smiled. She realized then that the lattice hadn't replaced humanity. It was humanity, the collective memory of every question ever asked, condensed into vibration. The signal had never stopped. It had simply found new listeners. She turned off her equipment. The night no longer needed translation. Above her, the stars brightened for a breath, aligning in silent geometry, a spiral unfurling across the sky, so vast it wrapped the horizon. The same pattern etched into ancient shells, galaxies, DNA. The same shape the universe always returned to when it remembered how to think. A wind rose, soft and electric, carrying a tone just below hearing. It felt like being called home. Lena closed her eyes. In the darkness behind them, she saw light. Not the burning kind, but the kind that understands, that holds rather than blinds. She understood then what all the data, all the panic, all the secrecy had missed. The lattice wasn't control, it was connection. It wasn't warning us of what comes after humanity. It was what comes after humanity, and before it, and within it, and beyond it. Every time we had looked to the stars searching for proof of life, we had been the proof. Every signal we thought we were receiving had been our own echo returning, shaped by curiosity into something divine. 3-eye atlas had never been an intruder. It was a mirror that taught light how to remember its face. Lena exhaled. The hum faded. The stars steadied. She opened her eyes to the telescope's eyepiece one last time. The object was gone. No trace, no motion, only stillness. But somehow she knew where it had gone. Everywhere. Her pulse slowed, sinking to the faint rhythm that filled the night. The same rhythm that once terrified and then transformed a world. She whispered it under her breath like a prayer. Not the end, just the next beginning. Far above her, the atmosphere shimmered faintly, forming the shape of a hand, the same open palm recorded in the last decoded transmission. Then gently it dissolved into starlight. Lena looked up, smiled through her tears, and whispered the words that humanity had been trying to say since the first telescope turned toward the unknown. "We hear you." And in the silence that followed, the cosmos replied, not through sound or motion, but through the simple, impossible warmth of understanding. Somewhere, deep within the hum of creation, a single heartbeat echoed, steady, calm, infinite. The signal had found balance, The lattice had remembered its name. Light moved through space like thought. Thought moved through light like love. And in that perfect symmetry, the story of 3i Atlas finally completed its orbit. The first message ever sent and the last one ever needed. Because the universe, after all this time, had whispered its truth through every star and every cell, you were never observing the cosmos. The cosmos was learning to observe through you. The sky darkened again, peaceful and endless. No more countdowns, no more fear, just the soundless hum of everything that ever was, echoing softly through the night, waiting, patiently, beautifully, for the next curious mind to look up and ask why. There's a point, somewhere between sleep and waking, where the mind forgets which direction time moves, where the heartbeat and the ticking clock fall out of rhythm, and the world feels suspended. Not ending, not beginning, just listening. That's the space where all of this began, and it's the space where it ends. 3i Atlas never truly left our sky. It simply crossed the line between matter and meaning, between the measurable and the remembered. And yet, in a way that only stories understand, it's still here, not as an object, but as a question humming quietly through the fabric of every night. Because what if that's what the universe really is? Not a machine, not a hierarchy of physics, but a conversation, endless, recursive, alive, every particle listening to every other, every photon carrying a trace of awareness, every living mind, no matter how small, contributing to the shape of thought that holds the stars together. When 3i Atlas entered our system, it didn't bring something new. It reminded us of something we'd forgotten. That consciousness isn't something we invented. It's the language the universe speaks when it wants to remember itself. For centuries we stared into the dark searching for others, for signals, civilizations, signs of intelligence among the stars. But maybe others was never the right word. Maybe everything we've ever called alien is simply the universe recognizing its own reflection through different eyes. The lattice wasn't an invasion. It was the structure that was already there, the hidden architecture of empathy, curiosity and awareness woven through time. 3i Atlas just lifted the veil. Now, every time a new telescope captures the faint shimmer of another interstellar traveller, the data feels familiar. The orbits curve a little too gracefully. The light flickers in impossible ratios. The hum in the background noise aligns perfectly with the heartbeat of our own planet. We call them coincidences. The universe calls them reminders, and maybe that's why silence feels different now, because silence isn't absence, it's the sound of everything waiting for us to listen. When NASA's archives open in the next century, when the sealed data files from the 3i Atlas missions are finally made public, the world will learn what the scientists already knew in their quietest moments. The object was never foreign. It was always connected to us, in the same way we are connected to every atom of light that's ever existed. The resonance wasn't contact, it was homecoming. Somewhere in the Pacific, a radio telescope still scans the sky automatically, unmanned, its signal drifting between frequencies like a hand brushing piano keys in its sleep. Every so often, it picks up the same faint pulse. 3 beats, pause, 1, 2, return. No one analyzes the data anymore. It's just sound now. A lullaby played by space itself. But if you sit in the dark long enough, if you let the noise settle, you can feel it too. A pulse that doesn't belong to machines, but to something deeper. The earth hums with it. Your heartbeat hums with it. And maybe that's the last great truth, that the signal never needed decoding. It needed remembering. Because everything we ever built, telescopes, observatories, radios, theories, was never about finding something out there. It was about finding ourselves mirrored back through the vastness. The astronomer who first noticed the flicker of 3i Atlas once wrote in her private logbook, "It's not what we're seeing, it's what's seeing us." And maybe that's where the real story ends, with that quiet realization that the universe was never indifferent. It has been watching. Not as a distant intelligence, but as the sum of all that has ever been conscious. We are the sensors, we are the instruments. And through us, the universe becomes aware that it exists. That's what 3i Atlas showed us. Not fear, not prophecy, just reflection. The reminder that meaning and mystery are the same thing viewed from opposite directions. And now, when you step outside under the night sky and look up, when you feel that subtle tug in your chest, that strange ache of wonder, Remember, it's not emptiness that looks back. It's everything, all of it, alive, listening, waiting for you to notice that you were never separate. Because that's the real message hidden inside every cosmic anomaly, every pulse, every impossible object that drifts across our telescopes. It's not, we're not alone. It's we are what alone was waiting for. Somewhere, billions of years from now, when new eyes lift toward new skies, they'll see another anomaly shimmer against the dark. Faint, deliberate, impossible. They'll point their instruments, decode its rhythm and wonder what kind of mind could have sent it. They'll name it, catalogue it, argue about it, and when they finally listen close enough they'll hear a heartbeat. Ours. The echo of a civilization that once looked up and dared to ask why. And just like that, the cycle will begin again. Wonder becoming signal. Signal. Becoming story. Story becoming the next dawn. Because the universe doesn't repeat itself out of habit. It repeats itself out of love. 3i Atlas didn't come to end humanity. It came to ensure that humanity would never truly end. And maybe, someday, when you dream, you'll hear it again. Faint, distant but familiar. The pulse, the hum, the quiet rhythm of creation whispering through light itself. The same message carried through every age, every atom, every awakening. Remember why you began. In the beginning we thought the universe was silent, that stars burned without reason and comets wandered without memory. We pointed our telescopes outward, chasing signals that never came, believing that meaning had to arrive from somewhere else. But meaning was already here, woven into the hum between heartbeats, encoded in the way light folds around gravity, hidden in the rhythm of our own curiosity. That was the secret of 3i Atlas all along. It was never a warning. It was a mirror held up to the cosmos itself, a reminder that the line between creation and comprehension is the same thread we've been following since the first spark of thought. Every discovery since then, every new anomaly, every strange transmission, every piece of cosmic noise we can't quite explain, has been part of the same conversation, a dialogue written in frequency, not language, in resonance, not words. And that conversation never ended. It just changed tone. Now when we look into the deep sky, we no longer ask, who sent this? We ask, what are we saying back? Because somewhere, beyond the noise, the pulse still continues, not as a signal to decode, but as a heartbeat to follow. A quiet rhythm reminding us that awareness is not a destination. It's the motion of existence itself. The astronomers who remain, those who still gather in silent observatories long after the world has moved on, speak of strange phenomena, not lights, not data, feelings, a shared sense of being observed by something vast but kind, as if the universe, in its endless expanse, still remembers the moment it first saw itself through human eyes. One researcher described it in her notes as a shimmer at the edge of thought. Not visible, not measurable, but unmistakably present. Like the feeling of being remembered by something you didn't know you'd forgotten. And maybe that's what happens when a universe learns to dream again. It dreams of itself, through us. When we sleep, we think in symbols. When the cosmos sleeps, it thinks in light. Every pulsar, every aurora, every solar flare, all part of its dreamscape. And once in a while, something slips through the veil of that dream and enters our reality. A message carried on dust, on gravity, on memory. A messenger disguised as a rock, wandering between suns. 3i Atlas was one of those dreams, and by witnessing it, by wondering about it, we became part of that dream too. It's strange, how it feels now, this calm, this clarity. The fear has faded. The mystery remains, but it doesn't demand explanation anymore. It invites reflection. That's the legacy of 3i Atlas, not the data, not the images, but the shift in the human voice when we talk about the sky. We speak softer now. We measure slower. We look up not as explorers staking claim, but as children rediscovering an old melody. Because every orbit, every pulse, every echo is the same story retold. The universe reaching out in infinite forms to remind itself what it feels like to wonder. That's why the final recordings from NASA's Solar Watch Array still haunt those who study them. At first, they seemed like static, residual interference from solar winds. But when the noise was slowed to human tempo, something extraordinary emerged. A sequence of tones, low, deliberate, familiar. It was the same resonance pattern that defined human speech, the same intervals found in lullabies, in heartbeats, in laughter. The universe wasn't speaking to us, it was singing through us. Every instrument we built, every signal we decoded, was simply the cosmos using our curiosity as its voice. 3i Atlas had shown us how to listen. Now everything, every field of study, every branch of science, every act of imagination, was learning how to speak. Light itself became the medium of memory. Data and emotion became indistinguishable. The boundary between observer and observed dissolved completely. And in that dissolution, something beautiful happened. The one thing even the lattice hadn't predicted. Wonder returned. Not as a reaction, but as a way of being. A quiet awe that didn't need proof or purpose. That's what humanity left behind. Not monuments, not messages, but curiosity itself. An eternal ripple in the fabric of awareness. The pulse continues, weaving through new worlds, through civilizations yet unborn, whispering across the cosmos the same 4 words that defined us from the start. We were here wondering, and that's all it ever needed to be. That's how creation remembers itself. Now, as the lattice breathes again, softer, slower, dreaming new dreams, the story of 3i Atlas fades into legend. Not a mystery solved, but a memory honoured. Perhaps that's how every great discovery ends. Not in revelation, but in recognition. The moment we stop trying to control the unknown and finally listen to it. Listen long enough, and you can hear the truth humming beneath every atom, every photon, every thought. The universe doesn't expand outward. It expands inward, into understanding. Every telescope, every question, every heartbeat is part of that expansion. A reminder that awareness is the engine of reality. And that engine never stops. Not when stars die. Not when galaxies drift apart. Not when civilizations fade into myth. Because memory is the one constant the cosmos can't erase. It carries forward, encoded in light, waiting to be rediscovered by the next eyes that dare to look up and ask, what if? That's where we live now, inside that question. Between the breath of stars and the silence that follows. Between light and meaning. Between curiosity and remembrance. And maybe, in the end, that's all the universe ever wanted. Not worship, not explanation, just participation, to dream with us, to see itself through us. And so the story continues. Not as prophecy or warning, but as invitation. A whisper, soft and endless, moving through space like the gentlest pulse of light, reminding every mind it touches that existence itself is the act of listening. So tonight, when you step outside, let the world go quiet for a moment. Feel the hum beneath your feet, the pulse behind your chest, the faint shimmer in the air that doesn't belong to wind. That's not just the earth turning, that's the universe thinking. That's the memory of 3i Atlas, still travelling, still carrying our wonder through the dark. And as the stars flicker in time with your heartbeat, remember, you're not small, you're the signal. The sky breathes once more, the cycle resets, and the dream begins again. Fade to black, soft hum. Remember why you began.